Good afternoon, everyone. It's fantastic to see you today. Really looking forward to and excited to be with you. We are going to look at something that's of great interest to all Canadians, and that is owning a home. And it is almost something of kind of religious conviction in Canada that you should own a home. People are convicted of that. And to be honest, the middle class in Canada has essentially been built on the backs of home ownership, or at least a lot of the prosperity that the middle class has enjoyed over the past, 75, 80 years has come from home ownership. And so it's quite understandable why people want to own a home. So we're going to look today at what you can do, what you should be thinking about if you're thinking of buying a home, whether you're already own a home and looking at buying a new one, or whether you're getting into it for the first time. Now, we're not going to get all the way into every single detail. We're going to do another program later as we kind of dive deep into mortgages and some of the other considerations for first-time home buyers and that. But we are going to have a close look at how to plan financially for owning a home. And one of the most challenging things that Canadians face at any era is making themselves house poor by buying too much home. And that's very painful. So we're going to talk about that. I want to thank our sponsor today, as always, the Simple Plan community. You can go there and join in and join with us. We're in there constantly answering questions, interacting with people's very particular questions. And we want to walk through the journey with you of getting your finances where you want them to be to meet your goals and dreams in life. And by joining the Simple Plan community, you get access to lots of tools, tips, tricks. We'll answer your specific questions, and you have a whole community to walk with that has the same aspirations as you. That is to make the most of the money they have and to make the most of the life they have with the money that they have. So go there and join facebook.com/groups/Simple Plan community. So on owning a home, let's just look at a couple of things. Why do people think that owning a home, and why has it been such a path to prosperity? And it really comes down to almost really one simple factor. And most people don't see it, they don't understand that's what's going on. But it's called leverage. And so, we're in a different period right now. Here in early 2022, housing markets have gone quite bonkers for a number of years now, and especially in some of the bigger metropolitan areas like the GTA, Toronto area, and the lower mainland of British Columbia, the Vancouver area, but also in many other regions. Housing has just gotten more and more and more expensive, which leads to a couple of things. Can lead to panic. That is, I've got to get in because if I don't get in now, I'm never going to be able to afford it. And the other is the sense that we're really just missing out. And so it's easy to make mistakes, especially right now when a lot of houses are being sold through multiple bids that come in that are vastly over asking price. So you want to go in with your head firmly clear on what it is you want to accomplish, and don't get drawn into something that's going to make you miserable. This, for most people, is the largest single purchase they make in their lives, is owning their home. And it's easy to get yourself into trouble. Now, I was explaining about leverage and why that is the single biggest factor that has contributed to all this prosperity. With the last few years, 2 or 3 accepted, and with a couple of markets like Vancouver and inner Toronto over the last 5-10 years even, residential real estate prices have tended to go up, depending on which part of the country you're in, somewhere between 2.5% and 5% a year. Now, if you think about that as a return on investment, that's not that big. So how is it that owning a home has created all this prosperity? Well, the fact is that owning a home for a long period of time has been something that has gone up in value reliably. Now, there's been periods where housing prices have gone down. It's easy to forget that. There's been other periods where it's been very difficult to own a home for a number of factors. But over the long haul, personal residence prices have gone up 2.5 to 5%. So that's not really much of a rate of return. It's okay, especially for something that's pretty solid and that you get extra utility out of in that you get to live inside it. So it offsets your rent cost. But why is that turned into so much prosperity? Well, it's because, especially over the last probably 50 years, people have not bought a house for cash. They have not brought all the money to the table and put it down. They've been getting a mortgage. And, it used to be that you had to put down at least 20%. But even increasingly, people have been putting down 10%. We've had periods, and you still can, put down 5%. We've even had mortgages that went on for up to 40 years at one point. So how does that affect things? Well, stick with me here for just a little bit of arithmetic. So let's imagine that we are going to invest $100,000. Now, if I put in $100,000 and I get a 5% rate of return, now my asset is worth $105,000. And so I've had a 5% rate of return on my investment because I put in $100,000. But what if instead of putting in the $100,000, I only put in $20,000 and I still got to own the whole asset? So I put in $20,000. The $100,000 asset goes up by 5%, so it goes up $5,000. That means I've had a 5% return on my $20,000. Or sorry, a $5,000 return. I've had a $5,000 return on my $20,000. Well, $5,000 is 25% of $20,000. That's what's called leverage. So I borrowed the rest of the 80% of the money so that I could own the whole home. But I got 100% of the return on the investment, which is the $5,000, on my $20,000. So that's a 25% rate of return. That, in a nutshell, combined with the reliability of the increase in value of real estate, it's certainly in urban markets, most urban markets in Canada, has been just an engine that has driven the wealth of many, many middle-class Canadians and other Canadians, of course, as well. But that's what's built a lot of the prosperity among the middle class in Canada for those who owned homes. It's also why people are fairly religious about owning homes. They don't really know why that is, but it's been so instilled in them. You got to own a home, you got to own a home, you got to own a home, because it was the path of success for parents and grandparents and even great-grandparents. So, and I'm not arguing that it isn't the path. It is, with some good consideration as to how you do it, and also adjusting for particular circumstances. Because one of the myths that gets talked about is the Canadian real estate market. Well, let me tell you, there's no such thing as the Canadian real estate market. The real estate market in Moose Jaw and in Moosomin and in Halifax and in Gander and in Vancouver and in downtown Toronto are all very different real estate markets. So when we get these kind of global statistics of Canadian real estate, they don't make much sense. Now, one caution I'm going to add as well is almost Mark Twain talked about lies, damned lies, and statistics as kind of the hierarchy descending down in morality. And statistics are manipulated all the time. And if you are listening to real estate statistics, you can generally count on the fact that you are being manipulated. Someone is trying to do something. If it's a newspaper, they're trying to create controversy so that more people will read the newspaper. So they'll create it whatever way they can. If it's realtors, mortgage brokers, and other people in the kind of housing service industry, they want to generate action. They want to motivate people to act, and they want to get your business. So they're going to say all sorts of things to try to motivate you to act, many of which are fear-centered. Like, oh my gosh, the market's gone crazy. You better get in now. You don't want to miss out. to make money, to grow your nest egg that's inside your personal residence, it really requires a cool head, because there's some real traps that you can get into big trouble with. And so I'm going to ask you to take all those shows and what you hear with a grain of salt. You should definitely try to find trusted advisors you can work with, or educate yourself very well on your own market. Happily, that's becoming easier and easier, because what used to be controlled by the MLS, Multiple Listing Service System, which is a creature of real estate companies, that information has kind of been liberated. And so you can actually find out a lot of information. You might have to pay for some of that information, and so you should. You know, if you're looking at, do you ever go by these houses that are for sale by owner, and somebody's gone to Home Depot or the local hardware store, and they've got one of these funny little, it's maybe this big, and it's got orange print on a black background with a white border, and it's stuck on a little stake, and it just says for sale, or for sale by owner, or for sale, and has a phone number, and they've stuck it in the front lawn. If that's all that somebody's willing to put in, that's all the effort they're trying to put in to sell you something that might be worth $500,000 or $750,000 or $1 million, they're not really doing it justice. And just like that, if you're going to buy a house, you need to do a lot of legwork, a lot more legwork than, getting juiced up by watching HGTV and then going to the MLS listings or looking at the fancy brochure that got dropped on your front door of houses you probably can't even come close to affording. So do your research, be cool, keep your head about you. Now, I want to talk about, we're going to take a look at mortgages, specifically from the context of how much house can I afford? Because one of the worst things, probably the biggest single mistake that goes on in Canada, is people go to their mortgage broker, or worse yet, to the counter at the bank, to find out how much house they can afford. And the underlying thought process in there is, I want to buy as much house as I possibly can. And two, they're going to tell me what I can afford, because surely they wouldn't lend me money if I couldn't afford to take it. Well, both those things are terrible traps that can crush you. So you do not want to follow that path. You want to figure out, what can I afford from the bottom up, from the point of view of, well, what's a manageable payment? What's managing my risk? What are the things that could happen once I buy this house that I'm going to have to deal with? We want to avoid being house poor. House poor is when people get into a situation where, they own the house, but it's costing them so much to own the house of their regular income that it's just killing them. Like, they can't do anything else in life. They can't afford even properly to maintain the house. They can't afford to replace their car when they need to. They can't afford to go on vacation. They can't afford to go out and do anything. They're just having to really diminish their life in order to own this house. Now, that's a personal choice you make, right? Many of us, because one of the things we've really seen is kind of a ridiculous advancement in the scope of houses that people have bought. When my parents, the house I first remember my parents buying, and they had houses before that, but the one I really most remember from my early childhood is from late 1960s, early 1970s. This was very typical. It was in Calgary. It was a bungalow with a basement, you would call it. So it had 3 bedrooms on the main floor, one for myself, one for my brother, and one for my parents. And then it had a basement that was unfinished when we moved in. Eventually, half of it got finished and turned into a family room. And we still continued to play quite happily in the unfinished basement as well, where the washer dryer was. And it was great. The upstairs had a living room, dining room, kitchen with an eating area. That was very much the typical family home layout at the time. Some kind of ensuite bathroom for my parents, and I think there's probably a shower in there, and a full bathroom that my brother and I shared. Now, compared to what my parents grew up in when they were that young age, when they were children, we were living in massive luxury. The generation before was living well, didn't always have indoor plumbing for that matter when they were children, maybe didn't even have electricity. Certainly they were sharing bedrooms. There was never more than one bathroom. And, space was very tight. So already there'd been a major jump forward in the size of a house in the late 70s. Late 60s, early 70s. Well, when you fast forward another 20 years to when I've grown up, I'm in my mid-20s, well, many people of my generation at that time, they didn't, my parents had upgraded their house a few times. And so now the starting reference point wasn't that house that I was living in when I was a small boy, which would have been great. It would have been perfectly adequate. And no. The reference point was the last house I lived in with my parents, kind of their mature house when they're very successful in their life and they're in their 50s. And so then I start going after buying something on that scale. And of course, everything's upgraded and updated. If you're watching HGTV, you certainly know that. And it's a sucker's game you get conned into, because this extra that you buy is something you're going to be paying for decades. And it is going to affect your life profoundly. And yet the difference in your way of life between having a reasonable starter home or family home like I described from my childhood versus having the typical 2,500 square foot, and that's what it is now. It's like, average house size probably in the early 1970s was somewhere around 12 to 1,400 square feet. Now it's 2,500 and up. We don't need all that space. And it doesn't add that much to our life, but it adds an enormous overhead to our finances. So be very clear on what you need and don't get sucked into what you wish you could have, because you may become very sorry for what you wish for. So let's have a look at the mortgage side of things, where we're going to go figure out for ourselves, not from our mortgage broker or the bank. And by the way, just as an aside, and we'll talk about this more when we do a show on mortgages, you should absolutely use a mortgage broker. A mortgage broker has far more access to a broad range of mortgage products and will tend to be far more knowledgeable than anyone that's working inside the bank. People inside the bank are salespeople, essentially, to sell that bank's narrow line of products. And you might think, oh, I've been with this bank for forever and ever, and they're going to give me a good deal. They are not going to give you any kind of deal. Everything they do, that was true once upon a time. Like, you could be known in the branch, and the branch manager had some discretion and all that stuff. None of that is true anymore. Any so-called discretion is just built into policies and provisions, and nobody, well, let's put it this way. It's in the best interest of the banker to get you to pay the most that you possibly will for whatever you're going to buy, because they're there to serve their shareholders. And that's fine. It's a great business model. Banks are fantastic businesses, but that's who they're truly serving. Mortgage brokers, on the other hand, really rely on your enduring repeat business and references or referrals to do well. So it's in their best interest to get you the best possible deal. And because that's a big part of what their value proposition is, if they don't do that, you will find out fairly quickly from your other friends and neighbors and relatives who use other mortgage brokers. Anyway, so that's an aside. Let's take a look at the mortgage information that I most like to use. All right. Okay, so this is something else I'm going to show you in a moment. So the first place that I like to start is to get a sense of what's happening in the world of mortgage rates. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but mortgage rates have been going up, unfortunately, because even though interest rates haven't gone up. Haven't gone up for quite a while. And we've just been through another publishing of the new rate, and it did not change. Probably will change soon because of inflation, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So anyway, I go and look at the mortgage rates. And so I like to use a place called Rate Hub. There's others, use the one you like. They are the one that I find I get pretty good information from. Now, it's shifted to more marketing, so you have to be a little careful. So there they are, ratehub.ca. You don't need to go to the brokers. You can find it there. Just go to ratehub.ca and you'll be fine. All right, so I'm on their mortgage rates page, and I'm on the broker mortgage rates page. If you go under mortgages and click here, there's all sorts of choice. All right, stop clicking. There we go. If you point at mortgages, then you can pick what you want. You can look at the best mortgage rates. Don't get a HELOC. We'll talk about that another time. Cashback mortgage rate is just a gimmick. Don't do that either. I go to the best broker mortgage rates. Now, don't think that if you're using a broker, you can't get your mortgage through the bank. You still can, and often will, because mortgage brokers have relationships with the banks as well. So you can get your favorite flavor of bank mortgage through a broker, whether it's BMO, TD, or RBC or whatever. So if we scroll down here on their mortgage rates, it's like, okay, let's try to decipher this a little. So what is the mortgage rate? We see quite a variance here. 0.9. Wow, prime minus 1.55. That's quite interesting. Now, just as an aside also, this prime is not the Bank of Canada rate. It's a kind of an artificial rate set by, sort of by the banks. So 0.9%, you go, well, that's stupendous, and it is. That's dirt cheap. But that's for a 5-year variable mortgage, and that's not what you want. We're all about managing and reducing risk. So we want a fixed rate mortgage. Now, you want to look at what are the rates for the various terms. So let's go look at 3-year fixed rates. See, now I personally wouldn't recommend that. I think we're going to be looking at some significant inflation. And they're not that much lower. You're looking at 2.59. We saw 2.64 on the 5-year. So let's go 5-year. Whoops. You can go longer. Be nice if those worked out well. Well, those aren't even bad. 7 years is not bad. That's a lot of certainty to have when we don't know what's going to happen. And I'll show you in a bit why that can be significant. 10 years, even still not that bad. All right, so let's go back to the 5-year fixed rate mortgages. So it looks like you could get something for about 2.65, 2.67. I'm going to guess these are kind of alternative or small lenders. They're not big banks. You'd have to dig into what the terms and provisions are there. And let me just say, everything we're talking about today is about buying your personal residence. It's not about buying a house or a building of any kind for you to rent out to someone else as a landlord or whatever, because different calculations, terms and conditions apply to all of that. The mortgages, figuring out the finances, all that. So this is strictly for your personal residence. So let's go back and look at the best broker mortgage rates. Come along. All right, so 5-year fixed again. Okay, so 5-year fixed, MCAP, they're pretty big. So Bank of Montreal, there's your big bank, 294 at TD, your big bank. So, okay, we know kind of what we're looking at. That's great. So we take that number. I'm going to use the number 2.95, just because we have to have something to use. Now this is an outstanding calculator. And it's at Rate Hub. I'm going to put it in the comments here so you'll be able to see it. This calculator is really going to show you what the deal is in terms of, there you go, in terms of everything you should be thinking about when you are, or at least many of the things that you should be thinking about. Oop, I'll close that out of there. So we're looking to purchase, okay? Now this could be your first home and there's a few extra considerations there. Or maybe you already own a property, a house, a home, and you're going to buy another one. Fantastic. Either way it applies. So this gives you a number of things to look at. So let's say that we're buying a $500,000 home. Now, where I live in the interior of British Columbia, that's not going to get you a single family residential property. It's close. That's close to the bottom, but not quite there. Obviously, that's not going to happen at all in the Vancouver area or in Toronto and in some other urban areas. But we'll just use it for an example. So you come in here and you put down your you figure out what your down payments might be, right? So we're going to see why, ideally, and here's one of our principles, ideally, you want to have 20% down in order to get started, because it's going to save you a ton of money. And how does it do that? Well, if you are buying a home without 20% down, you are going to get what's called high ratio financing, which means you're going to pay a fee. Pardon me, you're going to pay a fee called mortgage insurance. Now, don't get that confused with mortgage life insurance. This insurance isn't insuring you at all. It's insuring the bank that you're going to get paid, that they're going to get paid. So yeah, you want to avoid that if you can. Because this amount gets tacked on to your mortgage. So you see, if you put a 5% down payment down, you're actually going to need a total mortgage. They're calling it $494,000, but this is going to have to get paid as well. So we'll see how that all plays out down here. All right, so we've got our, I said I was going to use 2.95. So if you click on select rate, you can pick a rate or you can put your own custom rate in. I'll put my 2.95 in here. All right, so if we've only put 5% down, a bunch of things are happening. First off, our monthly mortgage payment is $2,325. Whereas if we've put down 20%, our monthly mortgage payment is just under $1,900. It's an over $400 difference, about $434 a month. Well, $434 a month is a significant amount of cash flow. So that can have a huge impact. So that's one of the reasons you want to get to this 20% down payment if you possibly can. Now let's look at what some of the other costs. Now I'm in the Kelowna area. I entered that. This fantastic calculator is including whatever transfer taxes, the lovely land transfer tax in British Columbia, $8,000 out of my pocket. It's awful, really. You know, we want to make home ownership affordable supposedly, but you got to cough up another $8,000. Okay, so how much cash are you going to need? Well, it shows you the various scenarios here. You're going to need your 25. So if we're in the 5% down, you can select which scenario you're looking at here. If we're in the 5% down, we're going to need $25,000 for our down payment, $8,000 land transfer tax, $1,000 lawyer fee, and $500 for title insurance. Now, title insurance, all that is, well, I won't get into the explanation of it, but let's just say, yes, you want that. Often you can't get hold of the property title, the actual physical title. Nobody knows where it is or what have you. Also, it prevents any kind of title fraud against your property. So you definitely want to pay that. So total cash required in that 5% down scenario is $34,500. All right. Well, let's look at the other end. What if we put the 20% down? Well, we're going to need $109,500. Now, there's other cash considerations when you're making these kinds of deals. You may want a home inspection, so you're going to possibly shell out $300 to $500 on that. You may want an appraisal, and if you're going to pay for that, that might cost you around $300. So this now shows you the monthly expenses of your home ownership. So this is the number that you really need to get your head around. So this is what's going to cost you every single month. Most people are focusing on this number, which is the cost of entry, but these numbers, the monthly expenses, is the cost of perseverance. This is what it's going to cost you at least for the next 5 years. All right, so you've got $1,891 in your mortgage payment. Again, we're in our 20% down scenario. $342 property tax. That would be for the Kelowna area, and that's not factoring in the refunds, the home ownership grant we have in British Columbia, which would save me probably $45 a month off that. So, okie dokie. Utilities, these are just estimates, obviously. 104. Property insurance, that's probably a bit low. Phone, cable, internet, whatever. You know what those are yourself. In fact, you can change those, right? So, mine's probably 170, and my cable and internet's, that's probably about what I'm paying for that. I think this would only be about $2,400. Oh no, that's monthly. That'd be $200 a month. And yeah, sure, we'll call that. This is probably going to be more like 70. I'm going to call it 90 a month. So $2,560. That's my total nut every month in order to keep the roof over my head. Now, if we change that to the 5% down scenario, it goes to $2,994. Well, that's a little painful. So how much difference is that? $430 a month again. So that you can do some stuff with $430 a month, including you could pay your mortgage down faster, but you could maybe go out once a month. You could afford to do some landscaping. You could afford to, run your car better. You could afford to get a new car sometime with that, all that stuff, right? All right. So now interest rate risk in this calculator is a great tool. It tells you your mortgage amount. Again, we're on the 20% scenario. And over the term, that's the 5 years, because we went with the 5 year, we're going to have paid off $58,167. That means when I have to go renew at the end of 5 years, if I haven't made any additional payments, I've got $341,833 in my next mortgage. Now, at 2.99, that's $1,891 a month. But what if mortgage rates have gone up in that period? What's going to happen to me? Well, if it's gone up to 3.89, which was common from the year 2000 to 2010, and that's less than a percentage point, by the way. My mortgage payment, just the baseline, is going to go up there by $155 to $2,046. But what if it got to be like where things were at from 1990 to 2000, 7.23%? Well, that's going to cost me $2,600 a month, or it's going to be an increase of almost $800 a month. And if it's up at nearly 12%, that's going to be an increase of, it's almost double what I'm going to be paying. So now there's a graph here that shows what interest rates have been since 2006. And they have been very, very low, really. Really since about 2012. They've gone up and down a bit, and then they got really low, and now they're here. But since 2012, they've been very low. But I want to show you something else. Here's a little bit of interesting news that came out this week. The US inflation rate has gone up to 7.5%. That's a staggering number, and it's a staggeringly short period of time that's happened. That's within 18 months, really. Things have gone from 2 or 2.5 up to 7.5, tripled inflation. So what does that mean in Canada? Well, here's a chart that shows you the historical rates of inflation. Now, I'm old enough to remember periods of very high inflation where we actually had laws that were implemented in the 1970s limiting, I think actually it was very late 1970s, wage and price controls. The government, the federal government, mandated what could and couldn't happen with all wages and all prices. It was very painful. So if we look back here in 1974, inflation was running at 11%. And it peaked at its worst in 1981 at nearly 12.5%. That's a year, 12.5% a year. Okay, so what did that do to interest rates? Because interest rates are what the central bank uses to fight inflation. Inflation goes up, interest rates go up. So we see that interest rates have gone up to 7.5 in the United States, or sorry, inflation's gone up to 7.5 in the US. It's probably running, I'm going to guess right now, at 5.5 in Canada. It was 4.5 just a little while ago, but we haven't had a recent update. So let's look at the mortgage rate history from those periods. All right, we saw early 80s was the peak. What was the highest? What do you think was the highest that mortgage rates got to? Well, the highest mortgage rate, there we go, 1981, 21.75%. That was the mortgage interest rate, 21.75%. Very sobering. It was a time of great controversy and both enormous pain and great opportunity. It was enormously painful for people who were having to renew their mortgages in that period. You see that the really high rate period lasted from 1979 through to 1983, lasted about 4 years. And if you had to renew your mortgage at that point and you had bought it over here at 10%, by the way, 10% was considered low at that time, you just couldn't renew, like for many people. So there was what they called Jingle Mail. That is, people would take their house keys and mail them into the bank and walk away from their houses, because it also crushed the value of houses, because so many people had to sell because they couldn't afford to get refinanced. And they ended up it created a real buyer's market. Now that was the opportunity. If you were a buyer and you had cash and you wanted to own a new home or a bunch of homes or whatever, you could really make out well because prices got crushed. But if you were having to borrow money to own your home at the time, it was a disaster. All right, so even if we look at these other periods where inflation was not that high, but still running, we're looking at 7 to 10%. So when we're down here, I mean, this is the posted rate at 5. We see we can get it at 3. But if we're down here thinking, oh, it's never going to go like that because we've had it so historically low for the last 12, 13 years that people can barely remember it being above 5%. I assure you it can go up easily to 7. And if inflation starts to really gallop away, that is quite a real possibility. So what does that mean? It means you want to be clear that you could handle the turbulence. So if you're getting your mortgage today at $1,891, are you going to be able to cut the mustard if it goes up to $2,676? I would say you want to at least be in that position, or you're under a fair amount of risk because we're in a very volatile period. It's hard to predict what's going to happen. That's just something you want to consider to maintain your comfort level. So when we factor all this in, let's scroll down. Okay, so this just gives you a bunch of information about how to use this calculator. So you can see what's in this calculator, a lot of fantastic information, and you can start to figure out what's affordable. So you go, well, can I afford $2,560 a month? Well, This is on a 25-year amortization. So let me say, if you could do the perfect mortgage, in my opinion, it would be on a 15-year amortization. But that's pretty expensive right now in many markets in Canada. So I'm showing the 25. So can you afford that? Okay, yes, I could. Now, if my 1891 payment at renewal was going to jump up to 2676, could I afford that? So that's another almost $800 a month. Could I afford my housing cost monthly to go up to 3360? This is where we start to worry about getting house poor. And so I would say that the formula you want to apply is that your total housing cost, ideally, so that's all these numbers here. Notice this is not covering any kind of maintenance. So you're going to have to cover that as well. And there's always money to pay for maintaining a house. And some of it can get big. You get a home inspection, so you know I'm going to have to replace the roof in 2 years, for example, because that can run you $25,000, $50,000 depending on wherever. So you don't want to get in a position where you're having to finance more and more. You want to stay away from debt other than your mortgage. So can I afford, is this $22,560, 30% or less of my gross income? Because if it isn't, then I think you want to carefully consider whether you're getting in over your head. Now, maybe you can step up to 35%, but there's all sorts of risks that come into play. Because what if you're unable to work? Or your spouse, if you're a two-income family, and many are to afford a house, what if your spouse is unable to work? And obviously these last 2 years we've been going through, we know how much uncertainty there can be. So you want to be managing all this so you don't put yourself in a position where it's going to be very painful or impossible to manage if something changes. Here's how you deal with that. Just buy less house. Now, part of how you can deal with it is put less down. So let's switch that over. That means our monthly cost now would be $29.94, nearly $3,000 a month, just out of the gate. And at renewal, we could be looking at going up to $3,300. So that part of the risk, not quite as bad, but still $3,000. So if we're $3,000 and we're looking to be at, let's call it 30%, that means that we need to be grossing about $10,000 a month in order to make that affordable. So that after we pay our taxes and EI and CPP and all that stuff, and we buy food and we run our cars and we have some entertainment, we buy clothes, we buy all the necessities of life, we're still going to be able to afford that $3,000 a month. So this is the target. If you went, I think they do this the other way? No. All right. I'm going to go to my other calculator. I had it open recently. Yes. All right. So I'm going to go to my other calculator here that will calculate. This is just a much simpler calculator. It's going to calculate the mortgage payment. And so this is essentially how your mortgage broker is figuring out how much house you can afford. We're going to look at, if we've determined that we can afford a mortgage payment of $2,500 a month at a 3% interest rate, 25-year amortization, 60 blah, blah, blah. We're getting a $500,000, well, let's call it $450,000 mortgage. All right, so there's our payment at 3%. This is all your mortgage broker is figuring out. Oh, well, can you afford $29,660? They have a formula. They might go up as high as 40% just on this, et cetera, et cetera. Most won't, but they might. They're going to give you, their calculation is what's the likelihood of you paying back. Their calculation isn't what's the likelihood likelihood of you enjoying your life. So we want to make a decision where we're going to enjoy our life. So they might say, oh, well, we figure you can afford $2,500 a month. So what's that? That might go to $550. Oh, yeah, let's call it $550. Well, yeah, but, you know, all those risks, things go sideways, etc., etc. Now, one other thing I want to say, so keep it conservative, keep it reasonable, rein yourself in. Don't go out and make impulse purchases based on the fact that I got all jazzed up from watching HGTV and ran down and saw the latest show home on the brand new development with all the shiny stuff in it. All that shiny stuff is going to break down. Even those beautiful appliances, you know, when my parents bought appliances, they lasted 20, 25 years. We buy those appliances now, you can pretty much rely on them lasting about as long as the warranty applies, and not much longer. That's especially true for things like hot water tanks. Dishwashers are no great shakes either. You know, you might get more mileage out of a stove. Fridges, maybe, maybe not. So you're going to have to be replacing these things down the road, and et cetera, et cetera. So consider your whole lifestyle when you make these decisions. It's beautiful to conceive of yourself in this particular house, but are you seeing yourself taking your kids to Disneyland or camping or some exotic vacation somewhere? Are you seeing yourself being able to help take care of your parents if they need some assistance? Whatever the things are that are going to cost you money in life, you want to have some wiggle room. And getting as much mortgage as the mortgage company thinks you can afford is not the way to do that, because they're underwriting their risk. That's all they're thinking about. They've got numbers and they know what the risks are, and they're just trying to figure out what they are trying to figure out is how much can we possibly stuff onto these poor people and saddle them with in order that we maximize our profit as a mortgage lender, because that's their goal, is to get you to get as much as possible. So from that point of view, even with a mortgage broker, don't take their advice about how much house you can buy. Make your own plan. Work with a financial coach, financial advisor if you need to, and I recommend that, for making a plan about owning a house, because that's going to help you to ensure you don't get in over your head. Because if you get in over your head and those interest rates get worse and you come to renew and they're unaffordable, you can get in a lot of trouble. Also, one of the interesting things is the average length of home ownership is only about 7 years. And by that I mean houses tend to turn over about every 7 years. So that's not really long term. So we also want to make sure that our mortgages are flexible, and we're making plans around that, because it can be with an inflexible mortgage, if you are compelled to pay out your mortgage, which you have to do if you sell your house, and there can be very steep penalties for that. So we'll talk about that in greater detail when we do our mortgage show. But that's one of the considerations. You want to have flexibility so that you can get out of the mortgage if you need to. And by that, I mean sell your property because you've decided, maybe you got transferred to work somewhere else. Maybe the zombie apocalypse is finally happening in the major cities from, wave Q of COVID, or who knows what, right? You only have to work from home now, so why do I need to pay the money to live in a big city? Whatever it is, parents. My parents are aging, and I want to go live near them to take care of them. All those things. You want to have some flexibility. So you want to have the ability to pay down your mortgage and pay out your mortgage. Flexibility on both those terms. And we're going to get a mortgage expert in to talk about all the ins and outs of that, to help you make those considerations. You want to be very well informed about mortgages when you're going to look at properties. They're two different things. You want to be very clear on what you're doing. And most of us don't do that. We get very excited about buying the shiny thing, about buying the house, and just, can we qualify? Can I get the money? It's like, yeah, but let's make a big plan around this. We need some serious budget meetings in order to make a plan, so that when we go to buy the house, we know exactly what we're doing, what we can afford. We don't get sucked in the excitement and the emotion of it, and then end up with some real house poverty buyer's regret down the road. Or worse yet, if you're having to sell into a down market under difficult conditions, selling a house costs a lot of money, especially if you use a realtor. So, it can cost you tens of thousands of dollars when you make the sale of your house. If the property value has gone down, and that's happened, that happened in the 90s and early 2000s. Really, the housing market that has been going up steadily and now crazily, that really started somewhere around 2000, well, really post 2008, because if you remember what happened then during the mortgage global debt crisis, there was some real house catastrophes. So we just don't want you to get into those waters. So that's a kind of a long ramble about the bigger picture considerations of owning a house. Again, get some advice, get a coach if you want one. We've got some great coaches we can refer you to. Make a plan and be clear on your plan. And for people who are buying together, first off, my personal advice, don't buy a house with someone you're not married to. It can bring all sorts of difficulties and complications. If you're buying a house together, make sure you're both on the same page about everything you need to do and everything you think when buying that home. It's just so easy to get starry-eyed when we're looking at buying a house, because it's a beautiful and wonderful and exciting thing. We just visualize ourselves living our life with our families in these great places, and that's fantastic. It is a great thing, but it's also the biggest financial decision. I would rank it as the third biggest financial decision you make in your life. The first biggest financial decision you make in your life is who you marry. And the second biggest financial decision you make in your life is what you do to earn an income. And buying a house is probably the third biggest one after that. So I hope that's helpful. Happy to answer your questions. Love to do it with you. Come on into the Facebook group. We are there to answer any and all questions you have. So join the Simple Plan community, facebook.com/groups/Simple Plan community. Next week, we're going to start looking at investing. What should you be thinking about? What are the considerations for investing and for planning how much that you need to invest? So thanks very much for being with us. Again, I hope that's been helpful to you, and we look forward to seeing you next time the Simple Plan is live. Thanks again.